Welcome to Tatis University. In this video, we will be interviewing an international student from HEC. Welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Nice to meet you guys. My name is David. I'm 24 and I'm from Dublin in Ireland doing the Masters in Management at HEC Paris. So I began in September 2022 and I'm finishing up next month in May, having done 1 year on and then taking a gap year and then coming back in September to do the final year at HEC.
So what made you choose this field of study and this particular school?
I've always been interested in kind of economics, finance and accounting. In my home university in Dublin, in Trinity College Dublin, there's a partnership which would allow me to skip one of my years at college. So I skipped my final year in my bachelor's, moved directly across to Paris from Boston, having done my study abroad there, and had the opportunity to kind of go into an accelerator track doing kind of a combination, so a dual degree between the bachelor's and the master's, which actually means that I haven't technically graduated from my bachelor's just yet, but I'll be doing both of them this year.
And how did you know about the HEC?
So we actually got an email in first year about the programme. I hadn't come across HEC before. I hadn't really planned on moving to France. My limited French is probably the main force behind that. The more I looked into it and the more the career path that I wanted, which is kind of down the finance route, HEC comes up as kind of where you want to be. For me, I guess it opened a lot of doors that I might not have had and opportunities if I'd stayed in Dublin.
So why did you choose to move to France? Was it like really unexpected, or why did you choose it above other countries?
I guess for me, I've always enjoyed being outside of Ireland. Studying in the US, it really kind of opened my eyes to kind of probably a broader mindset. I've always got on very well with French people. I think the opportunity that HEC gives, whether it's kind of meeting international people, but also kind of opening doors in London for jobs, that kind of really opened it up to me. So I guess I wouldn't, if I was to go back and tell my 13-year-old or even my 16 or 17-year-old self that I'd study in France, I probably wouldn't have believed it. So it's a little bit probably out of character, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It was probably the school that came first over the country. I'd never taken a French class before getting here. And I remember my first day getting here and like a young child opened the door for me and I said, thank you. And then they responded saying they were in. And I had no clue what they were saying. And that was the moment where I really kind of thought to myself, why am I here? I just don't belong here and I can't speak the language. But yeah, I guess for me it was probably university first and country and city next.
So what were your expectations before arriving to France?
I guess I probably didn't put huge expectations. I think coming across from the US and I had 5 days in Dublin, so back at home, before I moved over to France, I probably didn't really think about it too much. I really didn't realise how far outside of Paris HEC is. And I really remember getting quite a shock when I got here, moving from kind of like downtown Boston to what I thought was Paris, but is more so the countryside outside. So I guess my expectations were limited and probably a good thing. I kind of prefer not to have expectations and then you probably enjoy things a little bit more. I think initially when I got here and like during the first few weeks of the program, I remember slightly feeling like I don't belong here in the sense of like, I think the US college experience is quite different than like Europeans and just the way they act. And I feel like the UK and Ireland, we can be slightly different and less kind of continental European. So I remember feeling a little bit like for the first few weeks, did I make the right decision? Do I belong here? And then I guess slowly over time, you get to make your friends. I think a lot of the people in HEC, I remember thinking, these people are very serious, like they're slightly too serious and I don't know if I'm going to click with them. And I think over time you gel with probably the people that you get on with the best.
Great. How did you apply to HEC?
So the application process for me was firstly an essay that I had to write to Trinity. If I remember correctly, it was kind of going into why you want to go into this program, why you feel you should deserve the place over other students. And then following this, we had 3 short essays that we had to write, kind of about leadership, again about why HEC and something around a news article that was relevant to you or the program. And then following this, I got invited to the interview process, which was, I think, a 30-minute or maybe a 1-hour interview with one of the team in the academics office. I remember going into the interview. I was quite nervous. I only got 2 days to like prep for it. And I remember I was in a beach house in Cape Cod in the US on my holidays after finishing up uni. I didn't have a shirt with me, so we went for a manic. When I got the email, I went for like a manic rush to a closest like retail store, got a shirt. The interview turned out to be really nice. It was quite relaxed. I think I've heard very like 50-50 in the sense that some people have had like very tough interviews, others have had relatively nice ones, and I think I probably got a balance. The beginning was probably a little bit stricter. I remember some of the questions threw me a little bit, and then slowly it turned into be quite a nice conversational interview. So I guess maybe I'm lucky on that side.
Were there any additional documents that you needed to submit?
I think at the time we had to submit 2 reference letters. So one was a professional and one was from an academic. So I remember getting one of my lecturers in finance in Trinity to write one. Again, I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure exactly what was said, but hopefully good things. And then the second one I had got from one of the directors of a company that I had done an internship with. And again, hopefully good things were written on it, but it seemed to work out.
So how would you describe this program overall?
Overall, I think it's quite generalist, it's quite open. So the Masters in Management is a 2-year program. The first year is a more general business scope, so you do your finance, accounting. You also take classes in kind of corporate law, in marketing science, and then you take some electives which are probably a little bit different. I remember taking one in Find Your Purpose, which was kind of to discover what you're about and what really is your purpose. And then following the first year, we applied to a specialization. So for me, it was the finance masters that I wanted to go into. During the first and the second year, you also have an opportunity to take a gap year. And I think for me, coming into HEC, I was a little bit younger than some of the other students. I remember I'd just gone 21 and some of the others were kind of 24, 25 with a lot more experience under their belt in terms of internships. So I took the gap year.
Could you tell me more about the gap year?
Of course. So the gap year was 15 months in total from May 2023 up until September of this year. I went back to Dublin initially for the first 7 months to do an off-cycle internship in a real estate fund. I remember coming up to the end of the year, I didn't have an internship secured like a lot of the other people, being quite stressed, but eventually these things kind of iron themselves out. So I did 7 months in Dublin. Again, coming up to Christmas of 2023, I was quite nervous. I didn't get anything secured for the January. So I thought this is my time. I've always kind of wanted to travel. So I packed a bag and took a one-way flight to Mexico. So when I was there, I also brought my laptop and a shirt. So it was probably a slightly unusual gap year for some. And then I was doing my interviews when I was in Guatemala and eventually in El Salvador. I got an offer for a second internship in London. So it was a bit of a quick turnaround. 3 weeks after I got the offer, I had to fly to London, and then I took 5 months in London with a private credit company, getting really good experience, and then came back to HEC after a nice summer in London.
What are the most important subjects that you've studied?
I guess for me, and kind of going into finance, I think like financial accounting is probably your number one, and the corporate finance. I think if I was to go beyond what the straightforward answer for finance students are, I think ones that have kind of stood out to me are like behavioural strategy. I think it really made you kind of think twice. In a sense, it makes you rethink how you think. And a second one that stood out was actually that Find Your Purpose elective in first year. I remember kind of coming into the course and I thought a lot of people were quite cold before getting in. And then it kind of brought down everybody's barrier a little bit. So I guess you get to see the real side of a lot of people, not focused on finance and internships and talking about all of this stuff. So it was quite nice in that sense of kind of just getting to know people.
Could you give me a concrete example of a project or a topic that you worked on and that really marked you?
I remember one in first year that was a strategy project. In my group there was a Spanish girl, a French girl, an Indian boy and myself. And I remember coming in, we all had very different backgrounds. It was at the beginning of the year. So 2 of them were engineering backgrounds. One was like a liberal arts background, and then my background was kind of economics. So like culturally and academically, very different. I remember we used to meet at an unordinary time on a Saturday morning, which I think most groups would be kind of refused to do. But yeah, we clicked really well. I think it was really interesting to see how different people think. I think we just kind of gelled very well together and we worked well. Okay, so the project itself was kind of partnering up with a startup, and you kind of walk through their corporate strategy, kind of what they're doing and what they're hoping to do in the future, and you kind of break it down. I think in that sense, because there's different opinions coming into it, that's where you kind of really got to see how the cultural and the kind of academic differences came into the way people thought about it. So I guess this probably is the project that stands out to me over the 2 years.
So how does the academic week look like?
For us, the academic week was very different in the first half of the year versus the second. So the first half there's a bit more weighting towards. We had classes generally in the morning from around 8 until midday. For me, Monday through to Friday. At the time, I remember finding it a little bit painful having to get up at 7 to get to college, but I think quickly you kind of enjoyed the benefits of being up and kind of getting done with the day quite early. And then following Christmas, for me, the academic year kind of seemed to relax a little bit more. So I think I chose an open elective strategy, which meant that I could choose what I wanted to do, so long as I met the kind of credit requirements. And with this, I kind of structured a lot of my weeks to be 2 or max 3 days. On a Monday or Tuesday, I would generally have it off, or on a Thursday or Friday, and then kind of just load up my classes onto those few days. So I think all in all, every week is a little bit different, but a lot of the classes in the first half of the year were very geared towards kind of morning.
So what do you think truly makes a difference into succeeding in this program?
I think with most things with HEC, it's about like what you put in is what you get out, whether it's in the library working for before exams, which tends to happen, or just more on the social side of actually putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and kind of meeting new people, interacting. The more uncomfortable you are in terms of just putting yourself out there to have new experiences, the better your HEC life is going to be.
So how is the teaching style in France, and how would you compare it with your home country?
I think for me it was quite different. In Ireland, I had a lot of big lecture halls with kind of 200 or 300 people per lecture, and there was very much kind of like a barrier between the professors and the students, and you would generally contact one of their assistants rather than the professor themselves if you had a question. And then in HEC, the class sizes are typically at least under 70, and 70 would be big. You have a lot of classes with kind of 40 or 50. So I think with that, it kind of makes for a more interactive. I think the teaching style is also quite different in that HEC really focuses on kind of like professional professors in the sense of they're industry leaders rather than just being pure academics. And I think for most of us, we enjoy being able to ask, well, can you like show us an example of what you're saying? And they're going to know it because they've worked in the industry. Whereas I guess I struggle a little bit with just focusing purely on theory that's never actually been applied to anything. So I think that would be the biggest difference. And I think it really comes through then when it comes to interactions with the professors. I would say it's less hierarchical in the sense that you would just speak quite openly with your professor, whether you have a question at the end of class or if you want to follow up with an email. And I remember actually only recently learning, I would always on an email introduce a professor as like, hello professor or dear professor. And a lot of my colleagues in the cohort would just say hi with their first name. And I think this kind of sums it up quite well, of just quite like a friendly and balanced relationship.
So what are some of the key administrative steps that you needed to handle when you arrived?
After the initial kind of admin of putting your transcript and all of your kind of academic stuff through, there was a short little list of applying for accommodation and housing on campus, which was surprisingly quite straightforward. You had kind of housing insurance, which I wasn't used to doing in Ireland or in the US. And then aside from this, I think a French bank account, which a lot of us initially set up, which again, there was a visit for SocGen and one of the other banks onto campus. Going forward though, I just went back to using my Irish bank account. I think there was no kind of downside with having like a Euro account. It didn't cost me or anything, and for me it was just easier just to have it on one bank account.
Did you face any challenges during this process?
I remember with the bank account it was a little bit challenging, and it kind of came down to a language barrier. My French is not particularly strong, given I'm speaking in English here. So I think I had a few troubles when I went down to visit the local branch and just submitting documents. But all in all, it was relatively smooth. I remember having quite a good conversation with them and we got it sorted.
Did you apply to any scholarships or financial aid?
I should say they encouraged us to apply for the CAF. It is still a little bit mysterious to me, given 2 years later I still haven't received it. I think a lot of the internationals have an issue with this. I think it's a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare in the sense that you put documents forward and you never really hear back, and you chase and you chase. And I'm not the first. Hopefully I'll get it done and kind of sorted eventually, but the CAF is a bit of a nightmare, I think, for a lot of the internationals.
So how did you manage the transition between France and your home country?
For me, I think the transition was quite smooth. I think the things that probably stand out as like things I picked up on when I got here was going for lunch. You sit around for almost an hour. That's nearly like the sacred hour of socializing, where you gather with your friends, all sit around, all chat and kind of bond. Another thing I really noticed was the stereotypical smoking culture. I remember being a little bit surprised by that, how real it is, how most people smoke, and kind of this emphasis on having a cigarette and an espresso as your breakfast, which I guess for me was a little bit of a surprise. But other than that, I think there are a lot of little things that I probably haven't picked up on and have probably become accustomed to a little bit. Like the sitting out, having a beer in the evenings, quite relaxed. There's an ability to kind of enjoy downtime. So it's go, 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 but when you're sitting around having an espresso or a glass of wine or a beer, it's quite slow when you're people watching, and I really enjoy that side of it.
Did you face any language barriers?
For me, definitely there were quite a few language barriers. My French was very subpar, and I remember initially going down to my first French rugby session. I very quickly learned that the rule of the club was that you can't speak English, and for me, I can't speak French, and the coaches couldn't really speak English. So that became quite a nice challenge, I guess, trying to pick up what they're saying very quickly, otherwise you're going to be left behind. And then also in terms of integrating with, especially the French side of campus, it was probably the best way to integrate. I think there was an ability where you could kind of join dots and figure out what's going on, and I think I learned the majority of the limited French that I do have from doing this, but also just in terms of meeting people, and worst comes to worst, if somebody needs to explain something to me, they would do so, and we're very friendly about doing it.
Have you ever felt homesick?
I don't know if I would necessarily say I felt homesick. I've felt kind of a degree of not knowing if I belong in Paris, I think, without the language and kind of that kind of integration. And I guess coming from the US, or coming from like having spent a year in the US, where I felt like I never really got homesick to Dublin, but that I felt like I kind of belonged there a little bit. So I guess homesick might not be the right word for me. I think I felt like I haven't belonged in Paris, but not that I needed to go back to Dublin. Albeit I do enjoy going back to see my dogs every once in a while, and my family, of course.
So how did you adapt to the French lifestyle and social lifestyle?
I guess socially there's a big, with it being a kind of a campus university and being quite secluded from Paris, there becomes a very quick like bond. And to many of my friends from home, I kind of describe it as an adult boarding school. And we're all kind of locked up in this campus, and you all have dinner together every few days, and you can just pop over to see your friends in 2 minutes. So I think you very quickly develop quite deep relationships with people. Like, bear in mind that it has only been 2 years or 18 months total of study. It feels like a lot of our friends, it feels like we've known them for 10 years. And I guess in many ways, you've spent probably the equivalent of a 10-year friendship with some of the people. I think the societies make a huge effort and drive a lot of the social activities on campus. They kind of run the non-academic side of HEC. So Italian society, the German society, there's a Benelux, and so on and so forth, and all of the clubs, they put on events quite regularly. So if you wanted to be doing something every night, you could very easily do so. If you wanted to spend time at home and lock yourself in your room, you can also do that. All in all, I think the societies lead quite a lot of the social interaction on campus.
And are you part of any organization yourself?
So in the first year, I did the Alternative Investments Club, the rugby club more than society, and then also we set up an Irish society at the time. So we actually got the Irish ambassador to come out to visit campus, and the head of Enterprise Ireland, which is an organisation for promoting Irish businesses in France, and they both spoke about kind of Franco-Irish relations. And then coming into the second year, I was actually living off campus, so I decided time is going to be quite limited, so I would focus on kind of just sports. So I was doing CrossFit. This year I dropped from the rugby, and then also I've got the Paris Marathon coming up, so that's kind of taken the focus a little bit more than the other societies.
Was it easy or challenging to connect with French people or other internationals?
I'll start with the French. I think for most people it is quite challenging. Language barrier is obviously one, and probably the prepa system, they come in quite tightly knit, and then I think you have the internationals coming in after generally already doing an undergraduate. We're probably a little bit older and probably have a different mindset in a way, and I guess to them we're probably outsiders. For the majority, I think this would be the view that people would have. And then for me with rugby, I got the chance to kind of actually meet them and chat with a lot of the French guys, particularly in rugby, and spend good time with them and have fun with them. And even if it's little things like watching the rugby in the Six Nations, when Ireland played France a month or two ago, I went to watch it with all the guys from rugby, and albeit not a good day for Irish rugby, and it was getting surrounded by 100 French men singing and French girls, it really helped with my integration into the societies. And then for the internationals, I think I do find I click better with certain nationalities, and it probably comes down to lifestyle and I guess commonality and little things like humour. For me, I think was a big thing. I think UK and Irish humour is quite sarcastic, and I remember initially when I went to the US, they don't do sarcasm, and we kind of struggled with that a little bit, albeit it's probably not the best form of humour, but I guess coming off of that, you do find you click with certain nationalities and certain people better than others.
So what are the next steps for you? Are you planning on staying in France or going somewhere else?
So for me, I finished my last exam last week, and then we have our thesis to do, so we actually do them in pairs. So myself and the colleague that I'm working with, we're going to work on the thesis abroad. For me, I'm going to go home for a little bit. It's been a while since I've spent more than a week at home, and I guess I want to go home and see my family and friends. And then following that, I'm actually going to move over to London and do an internship there for the summer, and then hopefully kind of set some roots there and stay there for the next couple of years.
So how has studying in France, and especially in HEC, shaped your personal and professional goals?
Probably quite a broad question. The things that probably jump out and how it shaped me is, as cliche as it sounds, like dream bigger or kind of reach for bigger goals. I think a lot of people in HEC come in with a lot of experience. They have very high expectations of themselves and what their futures are going to be, and I think in a really positive way it makes you probably reach higher, or at least be a little bit more ambitious than perhaps I was coming in. Not that I wasn't ambitious in any way, but I guess dream bigger is probably the big thing. I guess culturally, coming from Ireland, and especially where I grew up in Dublin, it's not as international. So I guess being in Paris, it's such a diverse culture, and as you say again, there's people from all over the world and from all different backgrounds. It really makes you kind of, I guess, broaden your mindset. I'm not necessarily going to move back to Dublin in 10 years' time. I feel like I have a slightly more global view, and I think in many ways it's opened my mind.
If you could change or improve anything in your academic journey, in your coming to France journey, what would it be?
I think to look back at the 2 years, the very beginning, when I first came over to HEC, and as I kind of mentioned, integrating, I found it a little bit difficult. I probably closed myself off to a lot of these social situations. So I guess if I was to go back, probably those initial months, just to be comfortable being uncomfortable and just take every opportunity you can to get out and meet new people and do new things.
And lastly, what advice would you give to a student that is dreaming to come to HEC Paris?
I think my advice would be speak to people in here in terms of whether it's the application process, whether it's understanding campus life, and whether it's kind of from a professional aspect, understanding is it the route that you want to go down. I think for me it's been huge. I think before speaking to people you don't really know what it's like or what it's going to entail or what the outcomes are going to be. So I would say that's probably my number one bit of advice, is contact people. And then the second thing is, if you are there and you get in, make the most of it. Go out as much as you can. Sign up to as many events as you can, and I guess just try and make the most of it, because as surprisingly as it is, the 2 years have flown by, and I remember arriving on campus like it was yesterday, and it's already coming up to the end.
Thank you very much for your insights, and see you soon on Totis.